Welcome to The Rest is Politics with me, Alastair Campbell.
And with me, Rory Stewart.
And this is a bonus episode because we put out our main episode this week a day early because Rory and I, in the interests of podcastery and The Rest is Politics, we both, at our various homes, got up and watched the Trump-Harris debate. And we thought we'd just share our views.
Yep, you've got me straight off a plane from the United States, so I'm coming from the raw centre of this whole thing. So I'm relying on you to be the more awake one and me the slightly more American background one.
Okay.
Tell us what you thought. What was your basic overall view?
Well, I tried to watch it. I took on board what David Urban, the Trump guy, and Frank Luntz, who we interviewed on Leading, I took on board what they said and said, when you're watching these people, trying to put yourself in the head of a swing state voter. And I tried to do that. And I have to say, even admitting my bias, I thought Trump was absolutely awful. And I thought she was good.
Right.
I thought she was good from the off.
When you're putting yourself in the head of a swing voter, so there are different swing voters. There are, I guess, young African-American men who are a big lot who may be voting for Trump. Hispanic men who seem to be voting for Trump in larger numbers. I guess there's also, talking about Pennsylvania.
My guy was a white, working class, middle-aged Pennsylvanian bloke.
Okay, in a rural area.
Yeah, kind of. I didn't place him geographically, but and who thinks that, worried about Trump, does he really want to go back to all that stuff, but not sure about Kamala Harris? That's where I was trying to be.
And you mentioned somebody who will have seen them a lot before, so it's about changing their view, or maybe were you thinking seeing this sort of fresh? Because I think that's something that's interesting. Because
definitely knows him inside out, but doesn't know much about her.
And that is, I think, important, isn't it? Because often in these debates, there are ways of introducing someone.
Yeah.
The odd thing about Trump, we've all seen him before. So there's not much he can say, either positive or negative, that particularly changes one's perception of Donald Trump. That a lot of it was about Kamala Harris.
Yeah, and that's why I said, I think from the word go, the fact that they came out, she went and did this handshake, which, you know, in normal human civilization, that's quite a normal thing to do. But he looked quite taken aback by that. He looked very, very uncomfortable. I thought she started quite nervously, but I think she got into her stride really, really well. And the great thing for me, I've always thought he's so thin-skinned. And there were just these several moments where she threw, as she was saying it, you thought, oh my God, here she goes. She's throwing him a big piece of bait. Surely he's not going to bite. So when the one that everybody was talking about was the rallies, you know, I want to invite you to go and attend a Donald Trump rally.
She said, I'm going to say something slightly strange. I'm going to invite you to attend a Donald Trump rally because what you'll notice...
leaving early.
Yeah.
And he could not resist coming back. I've got the best rallies in the history of the world, and blah, blah, blah. And she kept doing that. You know, the thing about world leaders are laughing at him. And he came up with this ridiculous paean of praise for Viktor Orban. And we talk a lot about Orban on this podcast because of his influence. But I read what proportion of the people watching in America
have any idea who he is?
Who would be aware. So he's holding this guy up as the arbiter of world leadership. So I think stuff like that. And I'll tell you another point where I really felt that he had lost it was another piece of bait when it was when they were talking about immigration, where it was clear from the off he wanted to talk about nothing else. And yet somehow he takes it into this thing about cats and, you know, people in Springfield, Ohio, home of the Simpsons, eating cats and dogs.
Well, so let's take it back to the fundamentals. So the first debate between Harris and Trump.
First time they met.
First time they've met. Both teams have been preparing them very carefully. There's a lovely comic scene in Veep, if you haven't seen it, where she's getting her debate prep, which we could maybe share in our program notes. But they will have practiced again and again. And she seems to have been unusually comfortable with the idea of Donald Trump. She wasn't sort of thrown off balance by the kinds of unexpected things he says. She made immense use of contemptuous face. One of the ways in which it was set up, there was no audience, unusual for a debate. They weren't allowed to interrupt each other, but in most of the ways in which it was depicted on television, they had split screen. So while he was talking, she was able to raise an eyebrow, peculiar, do all this sort of, and actually undercut often what he was saying with her facial expressions.
And he found it literally impossible either to say her name or to look at her. And you're right, the thing about, you know, when she put her hand on the thing, and the thing, the sense
Sorry,
of
what's the thing about the hand?
Where she sort of she rested her chin on her hand, and it just, you could imagine her doing that in court.
Right.
And I felt there was something quite prosecutorial about the whole thing. She was very, very calm. She never went down the kind of rebuttal rabbit holes that he maybe wanted to. So like when he said, she's a Marxist,
Yeah.
she didn't come out and say, no, I'm not a Marxist. She
Yeah.
just sort of laughed it off.
Yeah.
Joe Biden hates her.
Yeah.
Didn't even address that.
Yeah.
She hates Israel. She kind of did a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah.
But, the thing that really struck me was at the end, when they had a commercial break and the two presenters said, right, and now you've both got 2 minutes. She used the 2 minutes, clearly rehearsed, but very well rehearsed, to set out a kind of summary of everything she'd said in a very positive, optimistic way about the future. And she was, by this stage, so inside his head that he basically spent 2 minutes saying how awful she was. And I think that said to me, do you remember I've said to you before, I felt that in Trump, Hillary Clinton, Trump got inside her head. In Biden, Trump did not get inside Biden's head. And I think in this one, Kamala Harris has got inside his head in a way that will have left his team last night feeling, why did you not stick to the strategy that we'd agreed?
Let's go back to the strategy. So one of the things I noticed with Kamala Harris, which was impressive, I mean, she did debate well. And I think if we're right that basically nobody's views on Trump's going to change very much, his very firm supporters will still have responded to his comments about immigration and cost of living and how terrible Biden is. And obviously his strong opponents went into the debate thinking he's a crazy old man, and he did a lot to confirm their general view that he's a crazy old man. So it was Kamala Harris who was really up in lights there. And she came in 6 months ago. People would have said that she spoke in word salads. She hadn't had a great performance as vice president in terms of dealing with immigration and the border. People were very anxious about her as a candidate. She did some very good speeches at the Democratic National Convention, but people, even there, were saying, yeah, well, that's fine, but what's going to happen when she's into the debate? People were worried that because the mic was muted, she wouldn't be able to do her normal prosecutorial stuff of interrupting him. But I thought, just as a, setting aside the policy, we'll go into policy in a second, but just as a pure exercise in technique, one really good example of the way that she did it well was in the middle of the debate when the question of January 6th had been raised. He gave one of his responses, blaming everybody else.
Yeah, I just turned up to make a speech.
And when it turned to her, she very deftly did three things. First, she said, I was there. Second, she said, this is, and she became very serious. She didn't avoid it. This is a threat to the constitutional law. And thirdly, she said, and it's not an isolated incident. She turned it into a bigger thing. So there was the personal, there was the incident itself, and then there was the bigger story she made around. My only complaint, though, is that there were occasions when she went on too long. That was an example where I wanted to applaud after 30 seconds. After 60
there were a
seconds,
couple
I was
like that.
thinking,
Yeah, I think I get that, because they said right at the start, you have 2 minutes and then you can come back with 1 minute answers. And you didn't, but the truth is you don't have to use all of that time. But I see that he had 11, I think it was 11 minutes more than her.
Oh, goodness.
Of the microphone.
Right.
And a lot of the, I'll tell you when I realized that I felt that the Trump people realized they were losing. He was losing, was when you saw this rash of kind of Trump people on Twitter saying this is the worst moderated debate I've seen. The story tonight of these biased moderators. And I think this is, and if they were biased, I don't think they were, but if they were biased, I think it was, they were allowing him far too easily to break the rules, to speak over, to carry on.
But it didn't help him.
But I think it damaged him.
Yeah.
I think some of his worst excesses came through when he was insisting on coming back, often because she was yet again just doing a little dig that she knew he would feel he had to come back at. And that's where I think the narcissism came through. And I thought you can obviously read a lot about the strategy from when you see in the so-called spin room afterwards, where all the surrogates are out there talking. And one of the things that her surrogates were all saying was he was all about himself, she's all about you, the American people.
Can I just, it's a bit unfair to you because you're a friend of Hillary Clinton's, but being non-tribal for a second, stepping back, what is it that Kamala Harris was doing which was more successful than Hillary Clinton? What did Hillary Clinton slightly fail to do in these debates with Trump?
I think that Hillary Clinton is, and you met her when we were in Belfast, and all of the team that were with us, they sort of said, God, she was so warm, she was this, she was friendly. And I think there was something, particularly when she was going for the presidency, that she sort of hemmed herself in. She wasn't actually always being herself. She was very, very, very tightly controlled. Whereas I think what we've seen of Kamala Harris since she came on the kind of global scene as the candidate, which we saw very close up in Chicago, is somebody who that genuine empathy I don't think it's coming through all the time. And so I think and by the way, the point about preparation, Hillary definitely prepared a lot. Kamala Harris clearly has prepared a lot, and I think did it very much with that sort of legal mind frame. But I don't think Trump did prepare that much. And where he did prepare, I think he's got himself into a mindset where he's surrounded by a set of advisors who he senses are very, very worried about him. And he always thinks he knows best. And I think there's a part of him. I bet you, for example, he went into the spin room at the end of the event.
Yeah.
Right. I bet you they begged him not to do that.
Yeah.
Because what it signaled was, I've got to go. They won't be able to spin this. I've got to go and do it myself because they will all be saying I wasn't very good.
Yeah.
Right. So that was, I think, indicative of him not working with a strategy and a team that he trusts, whereas I think she's got a strategy and a team that she trusts.
It is a problem, that, isn't it? I mean, if I think about when I went on tilt in my Boris debate, just bring it home to something that I felt strongly, that you're right. When things begin to go off the rails, you have this terrible thing where you think, oh, well, I've just got to be authentically myself.
Do you want to take your tie off?
And you begin to underestimate your opponent. And I think that's maybe slightly what's going on here. He will have convinced himself that he's much better than she is. Yeah. He will have convinced himself that she's rubbish. He will have thought to himself, I don't really need to prepare this because everybody will see that she's rubbish. And all I've got to do is be myself, be Donald Trump. And as you say, that didn't work. And he particularly didn't seem to be good at her landing the insults. I mean, one of the other differences with Hillary Clinton is that Hillary Clinton did occasionally have a go at him, but it wasn't as effective. Kamala Harris seems to be able to...
Her jives were understated. They were provocative.
And
the smile. He's obsessed with her smile. She didn't laugh, but she smiled a lot. And she's got a lovely smile. And she smiled when he was being particularly ridiculous. So, for example, when he says, everybody knows she's a Marxist. Right? Yeah. Her father was a Marxist. She could have gone, oh, that is utter nonsense. Yeah. Why? But she didn't. She just smiles it off.
Yeah.
And I think he had a sense as the thing went on of, I'm not getting to her. And the more that went on, the more you felt she was getting...
And boy, should she get him. I mean, she was belittling him and humiliating him. But as you say, occasionally doing it with quite a lot of lightness of touch, which must have been very unsettling for him. So
the thing about 81 million, you were fired by 81 million people, and Donald Trump's having difficulty processing.
Yes,
that.
Yeah, exactly.
You could imagine. As she said that, I thought, I bet you he is seeing a shrink about how do I process the fact 80, and if he's not today, yesterday he will be today.
Or her saying, you're here in Pennsylvania, and you mind explaining to 810,000 Poles here in the state that you would hand over to Poland. To a dictator who would eat you for breakfast, and he hates the idea that someone's going to eat him for breakfast. Right? He's the big macho guy. So,
but I thought she handled the theme of dictators quite well. These are people that you like because you want to be like them, but they like you because they know that you're vulnerable to flattery and favor.
So I think that Kamala Harris stuck to the formula, but let me point to a couple of things where I think there is an issue. One of them is that on some of the policy stuff, Trump simply failed to deliver what could have been quite good attack lines. So he talks about Afghanistan. There is no doubt that Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan was a catastrophe. And Kamala Harris is trying to take credit for everything around the Biden regime. So she's got to take blame as well. What could Trump have done to land that better? Another example. She was the immigration czar, and the number one issue for many people in this election is immigration. And she clearly is associated with what's perceived as a failed control of the immigration. What could he have done to land that better? Because I guess if you wanted Trump's advisors, you'd think, okay, there are a couple of things there, and I think cost of living is probably the third, where if you're trying to win this election, there are a lot of American voters who agree with Trump on withdrawal from Afghanistan, on immigration and cost of living. How could he have landed it better on her?
I think by being more disciplined. So I thought the one point when from her perspective, got really worried was at the start when she looked and sounded a little bit nervous. And when it was clear he was basically going to make immigration part of every single answer. When it came to the question about immigration, he sort of went off on one of his weird rants and rambles, and they became ever more extreme. I think if he had been much, much more disciplined about saying, and I wouldn't necessarily put Afghanistan in the same bracket, but if he'd have said relentlessly, failed on immigration, failed on the economy, he would have forced her, I think, to engage much more in rebuttal. It's interesting how they have, all through this week, there's been, well, you were in America, you know, there's been this big argument about Afghanistan going through it's mainly through surrogates. But on the economy and immigration, they do have answers. But I think that what she was trying to do is just let Trump rant on, let him rage away, and I will just focus on the things that I want to communicate and I want to say. So I think what he didn't do was draw her into a debate about those issues, because she was able to laugh off the fact that he's talking about immigrants eating cats and dogs.
You're Trump, I'm Kamala Harris. What would be a way of framing it that would almost force Kamala Harris to engage and respond rather than laugh it off?
I would have asked very, very specific questions about numbers.
Right.
I would have asked very, very specific questions involving data. The problem with him is that he just makes up the numbers. When he went into the spin room, did you see his entry into the spin room? He basically said, well, that was of the 7 debates I've done, whatever it is, that's the best debate I've ever done. We've got the numbers. I'm winning by 70%, 90%, 63%. They're saying, where are you getting these numbers? And he said, I feel good. And so, and then did this thing. This is classic spin. You know, the Harris team say they'd like another debate. Well, they're saying that because they know they've lost. And just, so I feel that he, on the data, because he just makes stuff up, because he says, I delivered the most jobs in the history of the world, I'm the most popular, I've got the biggest crowds. He talks in these superlatives without ever having real figures. It means that when it comes to something like immigration and the economy, he started off by saying, you were the immigration czar, and then went off on one of his tangents. He should have been armed with fact, information. She would then have been forced to rebut it, and then have been just sort of down having a messy draw.
So he clearly thought one of his killer facts, which he returned to, I think, at least twice, perhaps 3 times, is to say, you're criticizing me for putting tariffs up. You say that's going to put up the cost of living for people. But you didn't get rid of my tariffs. You kept my tariffs against China. If you disagree with my tariffs, why did you keep them in place? But again, she didn't feel any need to respond to that.
I think that the way that he debates has given her almost like a strategic opening, sort of to ignore the substance of what he says and stick to what. Now, there's a risk in that. There's always a risk in that. People think they say they're not answering the question. The thing on tariffs, by the way, have you been following in America? I've seen a lot of stuff really, really, really critical of the New York Times, because they have just been swallowing this line from Trump that if you put tariffs on goods, the country that you're putting them on will pay the price. And there's been this huge argument going on. And I sort of felt that was another one where she might have come back when he talked about tariffs are going to sort of save the American people.
China's going to pay.
And so I think she's gone into sort of non-rebuttal mode, which historically my campaign style would always rebut. But I can see why with Trump it's not the sensible thing to do, because the minute you're into a kind of messy argument about you said, he said, she said, I think you go nowhere. I thought the other thing I quite enjoyed was, I thought the moderators got a lot of flack from both sides. They always do. But actually, I think they did a pretty good job, because he's so difficult to keep under any control. They did call out, I think, on 4 occasions, stuff where they said, no, that's not true, or,
there's no evidence for that.
There's no evidence of that.
Well, this was true. We've talked to the city manager in Springfield, and there's no evidence of any pets being eaten.
Eaten by immigrants. That was a very crazy moment. I mean, that when he said, they're coming over here and they're eating our pets.
But that stuff, though, I mean, presumably he's getting it from somewhere. He's seen it on social media.
He said he saw it on television. Somebody said it on television. But this is the whole thing. And then the other thing
he spends a lot of time watching television, eating his Big Macs.
Well, if you read Michael Wolff's book of his first term, I mean, he spent the whole time eating Big Macs and talking to his friends while watching television. A couple of things maybe to close off with. I thought one of the most significant exchanges policy-wise was on Ukraine, where twice he was given the opportunity to say that he thought it would be good for the world and good for America if Ukraine won. against Putin, and he would not say that. He just kept saying he could sort this war out in 5 minutes. And I thought she absolutely nailed him on the response with the point about dictators you made earlier. And the second thing I think that's worth reflecting on, if you remember in Chicago, the buzz of excitement that there was around the place when it was thought that Taylor Swift might be turning up to endorse Kamala Harris. Well, now she's done it. And she's done it in I think, a pretty brutal way for Trump, because she's basically said that one of the reasons she's chosen to do it was because the Trump campaign were using AI to suggest that she was supporting Trump. She then went into a long thing about how don't just take other people's words for it, do your own research, check out these people, check out their programs. That's what I've done. And I'm supporting Harris and Walz. And when this was thrown at Trump, when it was announced in the wake of the debate, he looked pretty shaken.
What was lacking, and I think does matter, and is a bit sad in this, is policy. And I think we can all feel that Kamala Harris performed well. She, as a technical bit of debating, she performed well, or certainly much better than people feared.
Yeah.
But this is an American economy which has now got astonishingly rising debt.
Mm.
It's an economy where we don't really know what their answer is going to be to providing healthcare, particularly for the poorest people in the country. It's a country whose foreign policy is arranged around Ukraine and China, but we don't really know what role the US is playing in Africa and the rest of the world. And I think it's a little sad if you compare it to the kind of things we talk about in UK politics, where we will have detailed discussions about Grenfell Towers or water policy or the NHS, that in this US debate, it's coming down so much to what happened on January 6th, what your views are on abortion, what your views. Yeah.
I tell you what was interesting though, I was watching it with Fiona, and she said when Kamala Harris was, I thought of you actually, I thought of Rosa DeLauro because in her first answer she talked about the child tax credit. And she gave a sort of recipe of some of the things. It wasn't really an economic strategy. It was stuff that she wants to do for people. And Fiona said, it's quite weird because if this was Britain now, there'd be somebody shouting out, where's the money coming from?
Yeah.
And it's like a debate totally divorced from
anywhere revenue.
Sort of practical, how you're going to do it. Other than when Trump, in relation to, I can't remember what the issue was, where he basically said, well, she's never going to be able to do it because we've got 50-50 we've got 50-50 in Congress.
That was in relation to abortion.
That was abortion,
and that was interesting. And actually, again, it's a problem for Trump because, as you say, he tends to operate on such a sort of abstract, sometimes conspiratorial level, that when he's making a practical point, you're never going to be able to get it through Congress. It doesn't really gel, and people don't really listen.
Yeah,
it's actually quite a serious point. I mean, she's suggesting that she's going to have the kind of majorities that are going to allow her to completely overturn Roe, change the whole Roe v. Wade position, which she can't do. He's right about that, but because of her policy, he can't really land it, can he? I suppose final thing is, given that this election comes down maybe to 50,000 votes in Pennsylvania, how much difference does the debate make?
Yeah, well, I think that's a very, very good question. None of us will know, and even after the event, we won't know how the debate has made a difference. But I think if we've talked before about game-changing moments, and Biden stepping down had the potential to be a game-changing moment. I think it's become a game-changing moment, and I think that she did better in this debate than people expected her to. He, I think, did worse than people expected him to. I don't know if you've seen the data on the fundraising today for the Democrats. They had the biggest single hour in the immediate aftermath of the debate. So I think we're back to the whole thing. There's not long to go now, less than a couple of months, and we've got the whole sort of momentum. They've got that back in their sails. The betting markets have moved substantially in her favour. Now they swing around all the time, but I think that's worth sort of reflecting as well. So I think all in all, the Harris camp will be feeling a lot happier.
Pretty happy. And I think what we do know about these debates is they may not guarantee that you win an election, but my goodness, you can damage. And I think there's no doubt that Biden's performance in the last debate damaged him immeasurably.
Well, I think it's possible that history will reckon depending obviously on the outcome, that debate 1 destroyed Biden and debate 2 may have played a part in seeing off Trump. I certainly hope so. Now, that's the first non-tribal, totally biased piece I've done. We should say, by the way, our Rest is Politics US colleague, Mr. Scaramucci, was at the event with Team Kamala, and he and Katie Kay will be giving us their views in short order as well. So just search The Rest is Politics US wherever you get your podcasts.
Very good. Thank you, Alastair.
See you soon.